Shalom and welcome. This is Jerusalem Studio, and for more than 20 years now, ever since the American invasion of Iraq made the Tehran leadership fearful of a follow-up move against Iran, its military nuclear program has been advanced but constrained, lest an attack by either Israel or the United States, or both, destroy this precious investment so dear to the regime's heart in the unlikely event it has one. But over the last 3 months, momentous developments took away two of the Islamic Republic's Mideastern partners, first Hezbollah and then the Assad regime. Now the Ayatollahs are faced with a time-critical dilemma. Should they wait out the remainder of President Biden's term in order to probe the incoming administration's policy of pressure and bargaining, or does it make more sense, from their point of view, to try and mad dash towards enriching enough fissile material for their first nuclear warhead, or conduct an underground atomic test so that the second Trump term starts from a new baseline? In other words, how willing are they to collide with Washington and Jerusalem? For that discussion, we're joined by two top experts in this field, to include Dr. Olli Heinonen, who's joining us from New York City, formerly served as Deputy Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency and currently a Senior Fellow or Distinguished Fellow at the Stimson Center in Washington, D.C. It's great to see you, Olli.
Thank you for having me.
It's always a pleasure indeed. Also joining us from Washington, D.C. is Mr. Marshall Billingsley, a senior fellow at Hudson Institute, who formerly served as the Assistant Secretary General of NATO, as well as an Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for countering terror financing. It's great to see you, Marshall.
Good to be with you.
The pleasure is all ours. With me in the studio, of course, our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, troubling times. Today we heard the IAEA Director General, Rafael Grossi, come out and state the 2015 nuclear deal is obsolete. It may serve as a philosophical foundation for a new one, but they are inching closer towards the status of a nuclear state.
Well, Jonathan, you probably remember the old Clairol commercial, does she or doesn't she? Only her hairdresser knows for sure. Will they or won't they? Only Khamenei right now, the supreme leader, knows for sure whether in the 4 to 5 weeks remaining until Donald Trump is inaugurated, is this the right time for him to risk everything? All he has done for the last several decades, now that Israel has shown that it can destroy the Syrian might for what it was worth, that it can get as far away as Yemen, and that it already struck Iran itself twice, and the second time in mid-October peeled off the Iranian anti-air and anti-missile defenses. So if Khamenei has adopted the Western way of making sense of things, he would probably not do it. On the other hand, prestige matters, face matters, and as you have quoted his statement, he probably feels both domestic and regional pressure to show that he is not only on the defensive. So we will see over the next few weeks.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Heinonen, I would like to ask you, what is the current state of Iran's nuclear proliferation, considering the fact that Grossi, the Secretary General of the IAEA, repeatedly said there is too large of a gap to actually make up the unknowns in order to clearly identify where they're at?
Yes, I think that he's right. Under current circumstances, IAEA is, fencing one hand behind the back. It's not able to exercise all its rights and obligations. And at the same time, we see that Iran is proceeding in a determined way towards high enrichments, producing more fissile material, producing material which doesn't seem to have any plausible use in their civilian program. At least they have not come with a case saying that we have this and this use for 60% material. Then at the same time, as Oren said, the picture is changing. If we look now the Iranian nuclear program and they want to preserve it, they have a dilemma. First of all, the defense, as Oren said, the military defense capabilities are limited. This Israeli attack really demonstrated it when they took out a lot of important parts of defense system. Then they have certainly facilities underground. They are deep indeed, but even for centrifuge program, you don't need to hit the centrifuge hall to disable the centrifuges. They are very delicate machines, and if you can cause a tremendous shock, you break like centrifuges like what took place during the Stuxnet attacks, or you disable cooling or air conditioning. So they are getting more and more vulnerable for military attacks. So what he has left, he has actually two things left. One is that there's a secret site somewhere, small enrichment plant which can take the 60% and 20% enriched uranium, and in a very short period of time, just a few, maybe a month or two, to produce also the components of nuclear weapon, not just the high enriched uranium. Or he has still one more possibility to add heat to the debate and caution people by going to 90% enrichment and come with some fictitious justification. But at the same time, I think that we hear voices in Iran that they start to think, what about leaving NPT? You can leave NPT, but there is also, it's about 100 days time if you go in a legal orderly manner before you can really leave your obligations. So that will be a risky move for them. So I think it's a wait and see and looking what can be done. And I think that at this point of time, we will see more and more debate on using this current capabilities as a threat, perhaps increase the production as they have done, and going to higher enrichment. So this will be a very interesting 1 month period ahead of us when he's paving way for the negotiations with the Trump administration.
Mr. Billingsley, I don't think anybody is comfortable in their skin during a lame duck presidency period. But nonetheless, what are the current concerns in Washington when looking on Iran's nuclear activities, blatantly ratcheting up their purity level enrichment and installing additional cascades just around the corner before President Trump is set to assume office?
Well, Jonathan, we haven't had a lame duck presidency for just the next few months. We've had a lame duck presidency here in Washington for 4 years. When President Trump left office the first time around, Iranian stockpiles of HEU were negligible. The number of centrifuges were roughly 500. They now have more than 9,000. They are building the capacity to conduct breakout at Fordo and perhaps, as Oli has suggested, other as of yet undisclosed sites. They're certainly ramping their production to go well beyond the 5 to 7 kilograms a month. Just by the way, 5 to 7 kilograms of 60% HEU is enough for at least one device a month, depending on how you estimate the amount of the 90% enriched uranium they need. So they are very clearly positioning themselves to be able to provide enough nuclear weapons grade material for multiple devices. And this is of great concern in Washington. It's of great concern in capitals around Europe, obviously for the IAEA, but also let's not forget, this is being monitored very closely by other countries in the region, not just Israel, but the Saudis as well.
Indeed. Mr. Oren, we are not in a good position when we're talking about Iran's nuclear proliferation. Nevertheless, as you mentioned, it doesn't really have air defenses. It did just recently, in the last couple of days, install a number of its domestically made surface-to-air capabilities, but it seems like they are one stop before being able to really secure all of their devices, and their best way of doing things would be to hide whatever they have. So are we currently in a situation where the most important factor within all those activities is the intelligence leg, where the oversight is, of course, to the extent of the capabilities of each nation state being able to provide data and operate in a certain concert to make a big picture?
Well, intelligence failures make governments and intelligence agencies tend to err on the conservative side. And we have seen most recently in Syria that no one really assessed the vulnerability of the Assad regime to the extent that it fell so quickly. Of course, the prudent course of action would be to guesstimate that the Iranians could break out at will. However, for what it's worth, my personal assessment is that the Iranians are primarily traders. They are in the bazaar. They want to get to the threshold stage. Perhaps they are already on the lower side of this stage, in order to convert their assets for something, into something, sanctions relief, whatever. They do want to be in a position when the real bargaining starts. Obviously, we see that Mohammad Javad Zarif is back in the circle around the current president. He is not close to the supreme leader, but the same Zarif who was there 9 years ago when they negotiated the JCPOA may have another. Of course, this was with the Obama administration, not with Trump. So if one had to guess, without being responsible and accountable for the result of a failure of assessment, I would venture that they are going to negotiate.
That is, of course, the optimists' approach. But by the way, about the Assad regime, there was one person who a month before it happened told me that
Charles Lister.
It's going to happen. That happened to be an adjunct fellow at Hudson Institute who visited Jerusalem at the time, Mr. Ezra Cohen. So I give him credit when credit's due. But nonetheless, Dr. Heinonen, I'd like to ask you particularly, since the Iranians are not just breaking out for one projectile or one payload for that matter. If they opt to do that breakout, they will seek out an arsenal to actually be able to leverage that for whatever the ill intent they have in their arsenal. Is that something that the current data indicates of? As also Mr. Billingsley highlighted, one munition per month is quite significant.
Yes, this is the way it looks like, and I have compared actually this to the approach which Pakistan had in 1990s. And we have to remember that when they made their first nuclear test, actually they made 6 tests at the same time. So they probably had slightly different designs manufactured. And then they did their tests, 5 in one place and the 6th one in another place. And interestingly, the 6th one was much more advanced nuclear weapon. It was what we call miniaturized, which was already perhaps something they could have delivered. So this is, I think, what we see. And then I read carefully the statements, for example, by Mr. Salehi. There are 2 important things. 2010, he said that there are about 10 locations which they are looking for uranium enrichment plant, possible plant. It would be nice to know what were those 10 and what is there today on those 10 locations. And the second thing is then if they break out, this 60% enriched uranium, it doesn't take long to enrich. It's just a question of a few days and a couple of weeks, and they have enough for half a dozen nuclear weapons if they take this 20% enriched uranium also. And 6 nuclear devices, even if you have high enriched uranium, it works as a deterrence. And here I quote Mr. Kakodkar, who was the head of the Atomic Energy Organization in India after the real full tests in 1998. He said, oh, we need a deterrence and half a dozen nuclear devices are enough. And certainly it will get the attention. Can they do it? And what they have done since 2003, we don't know. And this is, I would not also take it granted that this program was dormant when some people didn't see anything much happening in Lovisan. There is no evidence that the Lovisan is the sole nuclear or explosive test site of Iran. And I have to remind you that when Pakistan was developing these things, they avoided to have a full-blown nuclear test, but they did for more than 20, which are called cold tests, during the period of 15 years to test their design. And they did those in secret, underground, in various locations. They didn't take in one place. They were all over in Pakistan. So there are lessons learned from that program and lessons which probably have to a great extent been available to Iran. So we be prepared that they can go faster than what we expect. And for those who are in charge of defense, it's about the risk assessments. What is the risk of unknowns? This is the question.
That is the question. Thank you, Dr. Heinonen. Mr. Billingsley, I'd like to hear your take on this, but also from, again, an American perspective, since Israel is aligning itself with the United States when we're talking about the Islamic Republic of Iran, and is quite aligned with the Trump administration that is due to assume the reins of power in Washington in the very near future. What should be done in order to confront the Iranians? There is the snapback sanctions, of course, that are set to expire in October at the United Nations under UN Security Council Resolution 2231, which naturally is something that the United States will demand of its European partners, which are also quite alarmed by the rapid development of Iran's nuclear proliferation. But beyond that, what should the United States, Israel, and its other allies and partners do?
I want to come back to something that was mentioned. I don't think that we can be comfortable in viewing Khamenei and the mullahs in Tehran as simply merchants in the bazaar looking to negotiate. Let's remember that this is a regime that rises in the morning and goes to bed at night thinking about the export of revolution. And regime survival is of paramount importance if you're going to achieve that revolutionary export. So what really I think matters here is the extent to which the Ayatollah has determined that either possession of multiple nuclear devices enhances his regime's survival or imperils it. And I think we'll have to, it's very difficult to know what his calculus is at this stage. Therefore, when you ask what is to be done, first and foremost, I think it's important that we strongly communicate as an international community, to the extent that that term has meaning, that possession of these devices and violation of the NPT imperils the survival of the regime. As we've seen, as has been noted with regard to Syria, these dictatorships ostensibly are quite strong, but very quickly prove to be brittle when a certain tipping point is reached. And I'm sure that is of foremost in mind here for those in Tehran. The snapback of the UN Security Council sanctions is essential. It's regrettable that that has not yet happened, but I believe that the mindset, the opinions of the E3, the Brits, the French, and the Germans, notably the Germans, have quite substantially shifted in the past few years, and that there, I believe now, is a willingness, is an appetite to see those sanctions snapped back. Final point. We have to keep an eye on exactly what Russia is doing in connection with Iran, and not just with regard to the nuclear breakout potential and any possible assistance being provided in that connection, but also with respect to high-end delivery systems like ballistic missiles.
Very important indeed. I'd like to actually revert back to Dr. Heinonen on this, since the Russians have been quite robust in their efforts to assist the Iranians, but they weren't always as straightforward in those activities. Are we expected to see a certain acceleration of their strategic relations when it comes to the nuclear file in the near future, or is that a little bit too far from the equation?
I think that the Russians, their history on proliferation is, let's say, good. They have not proliferated very much sensitive technologies. Yes, there has been some individuals who went to work outside, but for example, during the Cold War, they kept in bay all their Comecon members, whether it was East Germany or Kazakhstan or Belarus, gave some small tokens, but they made sure that they were not misused for nuclear weapons. And I think, but at the current circumstances, certainly we are in a very different situation, because Russia needs help on its war in Ukraine and wants to play at the same time a role of a superpower or major power. So they may give some support, but that will be maybe more on the technical nature, technology, scientific know-how, etc., in return for those missiles which they might get from Iran, or particularly the drones. So I don't expect an avalanche of transfer of nuclear technology to Iran. It's not in their interest. And then I have to say, when I look myself, these various cases which I have been involved, Iran is pretty well set up for breakout if they decide to do so.
Mr. Billingsley, earlier this week we heard President-elect Donald Trump coming out and saying, in response to a question whether or not the United States would preempt a strike in Iran against its nuclear program, he said it wouldn't be responsible, obviously, to talk into this, as he did also in his first administration, never talking into operational proceedings. But nonetheless, should the United States confront Iran's nuclear threat kinetically, if given the opportunity to do so in concert with the state of Israel, or potentially even grant Israel the tools to do it by itself with American backing and logistical support?
Jonathan, the president-elect made clear that he viewed the question of preemption as kind of a ridiculous type of question, because it's not terribly preemptive if you announce that you're prepared to do it. So I think that we are going to see and I certainly am not going to get ahead of the incoming Trump administration. The president's clearly signaled an intention to maintain a position of ambiguity. That said, the relationship between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President-elect Trump is strong, certainly far stronger than it has been with Biden and Harris. And so I have no doubt that there will be very, very close collaboration with the state of Israel. That said, the president-elect has also made crystal clear that he intends to use financial and economic statecraft to advance U.S. and allied national security objectives around the world, but particularly with respect to Iran. And so while I mentioned the snapback of sanctions by the UN Security Council, I also believe that there will be an effort to, not an effort, there will be a resumption of the maximum economic pressure campaign on Tehran, if I read the tea leaves correctly. That in turn will have a significant effect on Iran's ability to recruit and sustain its terror apparatus and to fund the nuclear weapons program that it's pursuing.
We're just about to conclude our edition today, and I'd like each and every one of you to have a closing statement. Briefly, if I may, Dr. Heinonen, we'll start with you.
I think it's important what Mr. Grossi said in a blunt way. The current JCPOA is not the basis for negotiations, even though many people dream about it. It's a time to take a look, learn from the lessons, see where nuclear program is, analyze it technically, and come with a verifiable end to it.
Mr. Billingsley?
I believe that how we handle Iran in the coming days, it will be fundamental to the question of the survival of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. I agree that the JCPOA is not a viable instrument for constraining the Iranians. I personally believe it never was. Fashioned in the same way by the same people as the agreed framework that resulted in North Korea fielding dozens of nuclear weapons. So what's crucial here, especially with a review conference of the NPT coming up, is that the declared nuclear powers and all of the aligned states rally around the importance of the Non-Proliferation Treaty and its ultimate goals and objectives.
Mr. Owen?
To add to the Russian dimension of the issue which was discussed here, when in Tehran they look at what happened to Assad and they see that the Russians did not intervene to evade his collapse, they know that they too will not be saved by Russia.
An important note to make indeed. Well, that's all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank Dr. Heinonen, Mr. Billingsley, and Mr. Owen for all of your insights, and I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition, from here in Jerusalem, Shalom. For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at tv7israelnews.com. Israel has launched operations
on Vladimir Putin.
helping Iran develop. We have logic, we have rationale, we understand how the system operates.